hurling manager in the county. I'm joined on the line now by former Kilkenny hurlers Aidan Fogarty and Eddie O'Connor. Welcome this afternoon, lads. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
How are you doing, Stephen?
Aidan, just to ask you first, obviously an 8-time All-Ireland winner with Kilkenny yourself, 03 to 2014. You'd know Brian Cody inside and out. I watched him last week. I was saying to Colm and John just a few moments ago in the presentation for Limerick at Croke Park after the final last week. And he just struck me maybe as a man who was kind of soaking up what he was watching and maybe using it as fuel for the fire for this winter, getting his team ready for 2023 and perhaps another assault at the All-Ireland. But he decides to announce his retirement yesterday. Is it a bit of a shock?
Look, Stephen, it is a shock, yeah, for sure. I think every year, Stephen, for the last couple of years, there's always rumours, or after that Ireland, will Brian Cody retire? Will he stay another year? And maybe 2-3 weeks down the line after it, you kind of hear maybe, God, I heard Cody is going kind of thing, and you kind of smirk to yourself and you'd say, yeah, well, I'm not too sure, You'd imagine he would like to went out on top. But yeah, look, every year is the same. But actually, when the news did actually filter through, there was fierce rumours there on Wednesday night that was going to come out on Thursday, and then nothing happened. I thought myself it wouldn't come out this week because, it's not Brian Cody's style. He would have let Limerick just celebrate their week they had after the All-Ireland. But then when it did come out, it was a shock, and I think everyone was a bit nostalgic. And I suppose myself personally, I was a bit taken aback. I just kind of, a lot of nostalgic memories came back in about the good times with the Kilkenny dressing room and how Brian Cody interacted with me, and everything that went through them 12 years that I was on that panel. And I was very shocked. But in the saying that, he had to go at some stage, so he obviously called it yesterday. So it's interesting. The county's nearly in mourning now, a small bit. Anyone you talk to, they just can't believe it, and they're just talking about the good old times. Yeah,
and there was enough mourning, I'm sure, being done after last Sunday. But interesting you mentioned just your own personal relationship with him, because I suppose from the outside we would have this view of him maybe being cold, hard and ruthless, and I suppose you need a bit of that to be a top successful manager in any sport and any code. But I do get the sense there was an underlying warmth there for players who served under him, and especially for such a long time like yourself. Is that true?
Absolutely, Stephen. Look, Brian Cody, and he'd say it himself, he was never there to make friends. He was a ruthless manager. And he wasn't the best manager, in my opinion, just only from my own view. He was never the type to put the arm around the shoulder and tell best to look the next day. That wasn't his style, and that's perfect. As I said, he wasn't there to make friends. But Brian was the soundest man you could meet on and off the field. He'd do anything for you. I had interviews for jobs years and years ago. There was no problem there, giving me a good word. Anything that he could do with you off the field, there was no problem. Once you're involved in that setup, he'd do as much as you can for him. But in saying that, it was never about any individual. The Kilkenny team was about Kilkenny. It was about the building that culture for Kilkenny, and no one person was ever bigger than the team, including management. And he would often said, players will come and go, but the one constant will always be Kilkenny. And I'd say that's in his own mind last couple of weeks maybe, or even building up. I'd say he had a decision made before the Ireland final, to be honest. And I'd say he just felt that it was a good time to go. And in fairness, he might say he didn't go out on top, but he probably went out on a great terms. He got this Kilkenny team to an Ireland final and got them to a real Kilkenny and a real Cody type of way. He never bought into kind of distractions. He always kept things really real, really down to earth. He talked about, I was just thinking myself last couple of days about the speeches and how he just kept things so fresh. But the thing that how he done it was he just kept it real. He stripped everything back, stripped it back to the basics. And you can go onto Google and you can kind of look up all these famous speeches and things. But Brian just talked about what was happening in the moment and what was the threats and what wasn't the threats and how Kilkenny were going and what was involved. And he set standards, and he brought Kilkenny to a different level, and he brought a culture to Kilkenny that was probably never seen before his time. Young lads holding hurls, even the club scene. He brought everything together. As you talk, county players sometimes can get ahead of themselves, but he kept them grounded. He said, if you're not playing well for your clubs, how can you play well for Kilkenny? He always gave the clubs 2 or 3 weeks back when the structures were small but different. We had 3 weeks off the club in the middle of championship now as well. So he didn't care about injuries. it was always a rounded kind of a tone for Kilkenny. And as I said, no one was ever bigger than that jersey. And I suppose in my time, one of his biggest jobs was to keep Kilkenny grounded and keep players grounded. And you had all-stars coming in January, you had hurler of the years coming back in January, and he always would have kind of mentioned it and not sat us down, but he just mentioned, I don't care about your all-stars. Last year is last year. We're moving on step by step. He didn't care. If you're cutting ribbons every day, collecting whatever the case may be, you're hurling for Kilkenny. It doesn't matter what you've done last year. It's all about this year.
Eddie, I was just interested to ask you, we talk or focus a lot, understandably, on Brian Cody, the manager. Now, I know he's obviously a good bit older than yourself, but do you remember him as a player? Did you come across him on the pitch? I know there mightn't have been too much. I think he was still playing club up until the early 80s. That might have been a bit too soon for yourself, but his achievements as a player, I think, was 3 All-Irelands. He was obviously pretty good.
Yeah, I was lucky enough, Stephen, to have played on Brian Cody on a number of occasions. At the time, I was 18 at the time, and I was playing with Glenmore. Remember one night I started as a sub, and I came on the team, and Brian was full back at the time for James Stevens, and he gave me a rude awakening. But I'd echo what Aidan said there, all about Brian. He was played the way he managed. He was tough. He was fair, he was honest, and and he showed all them characters when he went in to manage the Kilkenny team. And I suppose people will say, I'd say there's a divided opinion out there now at the moment. A good lot of people, including myself, felt a couple of years ago it was time for change. We felt the team was getting a bit stale, and while a lot of people are shocked maybe this week, I'm certainly not surprised anyway. I always felt, and I'd always echo the words of the late Ollie Welch. I remember on one occasion we were getting ready for an important match and DJ Carey got injured, and I said to the late manager at the time, Ollie, what are we going to do next Sunday? I said, without DJ. And he said, look at Eddie, everyone will be done without. And while we can all bask in the great glory and the great moments we had with Kilkenny and with Brian Cody, time changes everything, and Kilkenny will be strong next year. They proved in the All-Ireland final this year that they are on the road back. If they can unearth 3 or 4 more young players, I have no doubt whoever is at the helm next year, we'll get a very, very good tune. There is a lot of good players out there in Kilkenny, and I have no doubt that Kilkenny will be bang there next year.
Yeah, and the thing is, Eddie, he really did turn things around. We look at where Kilkenny are now. He's left them in a better place. As was mentioned there by Aidan, the fact that the culture of hurling really seemed to grow even more in Kilkenny, if that's possible. But the hurling as a sport was in a bit of a dark place back in the late 90s when Brian came in.
Yeah, when Brian came in, and the previous manager, and I have no doubt saying this, like the previous manager, in my opinion, hadn't a clue what he was doing, and I make no bones about that. Brian came in and he restructured his team. He gave every player a fair crack at the whip. As he said, his training sessions are legendary. If you played well in training, as Saggy said there, you got your game. So it was up to each person then to perform in training, whether you were I would say he managed the way he played himself. Like, he was full back on the Kilkenny minor team in 1972 and he captained them, and to this day, which is 50 years ago, shows the incredible man, what he has done for hurling, both as a player and as a manager. And to me, like, he has left Kilkenny in a very, very strong position, especially after last Sunday's performance. And while I've heard people during the week they are criticising some of the aspects of last Sunday's performance, why wasn't Walter Welch starters, why wasn't David Blanchfield starters, why was Adrian Mullen put in corner forward when he was going to get an all-star in midfield? But on the sum of the whole, in the last, I'd say, 24 years, Brian have got it right 99% of the time, and he owes Kilkenny nothing, and I'd like to wish himself and his family a happy retirement.
We'd absolutely echo that. Aidan, just to pick up there briefly on the training, I was reading Dennis Walsh's piece in the Sunday Times this morning, and he quotes Brian Hogan as saying players were being assaulted in matches. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the training sessions, they were gas, to be honest, Stephen. It was Definitely wasn't the place for forwards anyway, that's for sure. You know Brian played full back for Kilkenny, but the thing was, like I'd be marking Jackie or JJ or whatever, and they could literally cut the head off you, and Brian wouldn't blow the whistle, and next thing, a small tug of a jersey and to be a free in. This is what was going on in training, and to be fair, look, there was fights, there was rucks. I remember Dougal and Peter Barry going at it one night, full blown boxes in the middle of the field. And next thing, they just picked up our hurls and started hurling again, and that kind of fed into the kind of, I suppose, the aggression that we're trying to get with, and that fed into the kind of, I suppose, playing on the edge that Kilkenny team always did with Brian, and he, like, to his gas, he'd be talking no stupid fouls, and you'd be assaulted inside in that forward line, and he pulled for a stupid jersey, or, and we wouldn't talk back, but you'd look at him and he'd just say, don't do it. I remember a time Jackie, I think he was assaulting Eddie Brennan altogether, but he gave no free, but he talked to him at half time and just said, look, you just can't do that, like. It's just the smallest things, but that's what he wanted. He wanted us to play on the edge, and that was his type of management style. And as I said, frees were few and far between in training. I
get the feeling though as well that he was able to make complicated things very simple. He spoke about talking about the 99 final against Cork, and Kilkenny were leading by 4 points, but Cork just chipped away. And he said about this particular match that there was no kind of feeling of, well, we were hard done by or anything like that. It was that the only reason the other team win is because they're better than us. It's because we're not as good as them, and we have to do something about it.
That's it, yeah. Look, Brian, he never make excuses, and I think half of that was maybe for the media, maybe as well, Stephen. He didn't want to be kind of in the papers giving out about refs and giving out about that. That wasn't his style, but he kept it really basic. And even if you talk about tactics and stuff over the years, they were saying Brian don't do tactics, but he subtly did, and everything he did was kind of subtle. Every 3 or 4 years, he changed physio teams, he changed selectors, he keep things fresh. He might add a player here and there onto the team. I remember in 06, the forwards, there was just one little tactic. Forwards just pull out, put pressure on the backs out the field. We were zonal against Tipperary one time. In 2011, we went one-on-one. Just small, subtle changes. But I think the big thing for Brian was that he never wavered from his beliefs. So his core ethics and his core beliefs in work rate, in the simple ball, in your touch, he was a fan of the long ball to the square, there's no doubt about it. It took him a while to even change that over the years. And you'd wonder, in the All-Ireland, Eddie touched on already, a small thing maybe on puck outs and we could have won that game, but that wasn't Brian's style, and fair play to him, because he got a bit of criticism over the last couple of years about we're not changing our style, but and we're losing matches, and one of the biggest things on that was puck outs and was long balls to the square. But if you think about it, the 2 goals we got in Ireland was a long ball into Walter Welch, and it broke, and we got a goal from it. Like, so these are the things, and I suppose he's retiring. He has left Kilkenny in a good position, but in saying that, Walter Welch, Richie Hogan, these lads coming on, these are probably in the latter stages of their years as well. And these are the guys that were coming on. If you look at Limerick, it was the younger type of a substitute coming on, and they were making the difference. So there is a lot of players maybe coming towards the end-ish as well, but in saying that, he has left them in a decent position.
Briefly, Aidan, can you tell me who you think might come in next? Ling, Brennan, Shefflin, some of the names being thrown around?
Yeah, look, it's a lot of talk, I suppose, about who's next and all that. It won't go outside the county. Kilkenny don't do that. It'll be inside the county. You have to say a front runner is nearly Derek Ling, what he's done with the under-20s. Eddie Brennan, Mick Fennelly, just talks about Henry Shefflin. I don't know if he'll go after a year in Galway. I suppose you see what happened Colin Bonner. You just don't know, but to definitely stay inside the county. My own clubman, as I said, Derek, in with a great chance. And I suppose the thing with that, as sport is fickle, and whoever goes in next is going to be under serious pressure from the support, really. And it's nothing got to do with the manager. It's just the style over the years. Like, if you look at it, Kilkenny, we're lucky even to come out with Leinster maybe this year at times, and next thing we're in an Ireland final. So Look, it's hard to know, but there's a few names in the pot.
Absolutely, Aidan. Well, listen, thanks a million for your contribution on that. Eddie O'Connor, thanks a million for joining us as well.